this, well, probably next week early to get the minutes approved from Tuesday. So with that, we're going to jump into the first hearing, which is 2156, authorizing public utilities subject to the jurisdiction of the State Corporation Commission to establish rates that benefit low-income residential customers. And with that, Nick, could you give us an overview? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. So committee, House Bill 2156 is a pretty short bill. What it would do is allow public utilities to propose rates that would benefit low-income residential consumers. Currently, rates have to be just reasonable. This would exempt and state that rates that benefit low-income consumers are considered just and reasonable. And Mr. Chair, this would not impose any duty upon a public utility to propose these rates. So a public utility does not have to petition the KCC for these rates. But again, this bill would allow the public utility to propose those rates and the KCC to implement those rates for a public utility. This would be for electric, natural gas, water utilities regulated by the KCC.
Yeah, it's a fairly short bill. It's one page long, but committee, do you have questions? First up, I see you, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Myers. When you reduce rates for one set of customers, either the utilities profit or return on investment goes down, or other ratepayers have to pick up the difference to maintain that rate of return. At least that's simple economics that I learned somewhere. Does this bill address that? In other words, if we lower the rate for a certain category of perhaps deserving consumers, who picks up the tab under this bill?
Yeah, certainly. And that's a good question. So this bill in subsection B does state that these rates shall not be deemed discriminatory, unduly preferential, or otherwise in violation of the just and reasonable clauses of public utility law rate making, just because they increase rates or charges for other residential customers. So if these increase charges to other residential customers, these could still be deemed just and reasonable for those low income rates.
So in essence, the money doesn't come out of the utilities pocket. It comes out of residential customers' pockets to pay for this program.
I don't know if the bill,
bottom line is what I should probably say.
Yeah, and I don't know if the bill doesn't get into the specifics of that rate making process. It just simply says that if it does increase costs upon other residential customers,
that is acceptable.
That would be acceptable as just and reasonable for those low income.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Next, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, I like it, but how would they determine who is eligible to receive lower rates?
Yeah, another good question. This bill does not specify any low income criteria. It doesn't set a poverty threshold or anything like that. So that would be subject to a utility proposing what their low income threshold may be, and then the KCC approving that threshold in that rate making process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Burjan.
Mr. Chair, that was my question. So thank you.
All right. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, going along that same line, so each utility that would propose such a rate, they could define low income however they saw fit. It doesn't have to be uniform.
I would presume the utility would set forth some criteria for the KCC to look at when they're determining that. And
but say the electric utility sets it at one level, but say the gas company sets it at another, that's permissible.
Yeah, this bill does not. Again, that it doesn't set that threshold, so it doesn't contemplate that happening. So it'd be subject to the KCC determining how what that low income status is for each utility's customers.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So back to the question that was asked earlier from the other representative. I think the language in here is somewhat circular. So the first paragraph, as I understand it, well, currently rates are set based on your consumption class, so residential. So within that, they can't discriminate or be what do you want to call it, discriminatory. So, but in the second, it says that because a rate is then set, which would be this one, that is discriminatory and would result in increased charges to other residential customers, that it can't be found to be discriminatory. Somewhat circular, is that correct? So
You're
by
correct.
its nature, it will be discriminatory, but yet this prevents it from being deemed to be discriminatory.
In the sense, in rate making, similar classes of customers are treated similarly. So this is dealing with that residential customer base, and this would say that low income rate would not necessarily be deemed unjust, unreasonable, solely because it has another impact on another class of residential customers. So,
Thank you.
All right. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Nick. We'll move on to the proponents. First up, I've got David Nickel with CURB. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the House Energy and Utilities and Telecommunications Committee. My name is David Nickel. I am Consumer Counsel for the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board that represents residential and small commercial ratepayers before the KCC and before the Kansas Legislature. CURB was a facilitator of House Bill 2156 and worked with many of our Kansas utilities and the KCC staff to put House Bill 2156 in its present form. Please allow me to take a moment to explain why we believe this is an important bill. I came to CURB approximately 6 years ago, leaving a preeminent law firm, energy law firm in Wichita, Kansas, that practiced regularly before the Kansas Corporation Commission and the Conservation Division. I'm proud of my 30-year affiliation with that firm, but in the last few years of my practice, I wanted to give something back to the community that had given so much to me. I was hired by CURB, and I wondered what I could do to add value to Kansans in that role. Shortly after arriving in Topeka, my wife and I not having a home to live in, we lived in an inexpensive small apartment. One day there was a knock at my door, and I went to go answer it, but it wasn't for me. It was for the resident across the hall. It was a Westar representative who was there to either disconnect that lady's service or collect her past due bill. She said, "I don't have any money. Could you come back tomorrow?" "No," the Westar representative very politely said. "I have to either collect the past due today or shut your service off." "I could call my sister," the apartment resident said. "Could you give me a couple hours?" "No," was the answer. So that conversation ensued for a little while. And eventually the lady said, "Well, let me go see if I can find some money in my apartment." And she came back shortly and she paid the Westar representative, and that was the end of the scene. And I thought to myself at the time, how embarrassing to have your neighbors know that you're delinquent on a bill. Couldn't she just have paid the bill on time and avoided that whole scene? And it should have been me that was embarrassed because it took so long for me to figure out what the real problem is. The real problem is the energy burden that faces not only Kansans, but several United States citizens. 23% of United States citizens live in poverty. They have trouble paying their energy bills. They substitute money that they have for food, for medicine, for housing in order to meet those energy bills. When disconnection becomes imminent, they juggle their bills. They rob Peter to pay Paul, and they do that until it's no longer possible, and they are disconnected. And at that point in time, the utilities pick up that cost and spread that cost to all ratepayers. Arrearages do cost ratepayers money in terms of collection efforts and in terms of uncollectible accounts. It's spread to all accounts. Unfortunately, although very many states throughout the United States do something to help low-income ratepayers, Kansas does not. And why don't we? Because we have a Kansas Supreme Court that, broadly interpreted, says that you cannot allow any cost from any rate class to be borne by another class without it being violative of Kansas law. What House Bill 2156 does is eliminate that question. Nothing more, nothing less. It is not prescriptive. It does not make utilities charities. It does not mandate that there are going to be costs that are going to be borne by one residential class versus the other. It does not allow for discriminatory or unduly discriminatory or unjustly preferential rates. It does allow utilities the discretion to try to frame relief in such a manner that it would be helpful to their low-income ratepayers as they define it and as they present an application before the Kansas Corporation Commission, subject to the Commission's review under the standards that we have currently in the state of Kansas. But for the fact that we have an aberrant statement from the Kansas Supreme Court that for the last 20 or so years has kept this type of relief from occurring. Thank you for listening to what this bill does and what it doesn't do. It is, as our advisor said, it's completely discretionary, and it allows utilities discretion to frame relief in such a manner that it does reach their particular low-income customers as they define them. But it is subject to review by the Kansas Corporation Commission and by regular standards. And one of the things that I think may give an idea would be some type of relief with regard to disconnections. I mean, that's something that actually may help rate citizens throughout the entire residential class. But we'll leave that to each of our utilities to try to figure out how best to serve their low-income customers without being unduly discriminatory or unduly preferential. Kerr believes this has value for the state of Kansas. It's been a long time coming. For a personal standpoint, if all I do as consumer counsel for CURB is to help low-income ratepayers such as my neighbor, then I do believe that I've added value. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David, for testifying here. I'm going to go ahead and let the other two proponents speak before we start asking any questions. So there's just a couple of you. So next up would be Pat Vogelsberg with Kansas Gas Service.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Patrick Vogelsberg with Kansas Gas Service. I'll be brief and make a few quick points for you, Mr. Chairman. We're committed to helping low-income customers. We offer a variety of payment plans. We refer our customers to financial resources that may be available to them. Excuse me. And then also provide information on conservation tips. But we recognize that despite these efforts, there's still households, customers of ours, that may struggle to pay their energy cost on a monthly basis. And so, as Mr. Nickel indicated, we, along with other stakeholders, worked together before the session to come up with a way to explore a low-income rate. And we made the determination that legislation was needed in order to move forward. And so, the bill that you have in front of you, 2156, is that bill. To somewhat answer the question that was raised earlier, I think this bill not only will benefit low-income residential households, and it is important to recognize it is contained within the residential class. It'll help them. I think the argument can be made that it maintains service at that location. Those folks are still paying into the cost of service, and maintaining that customer, albeit at a lower rate, we hope will reduce arrearages, reduce bad debt, reduce collection costs, reduce costs associated with disconnection, reconnection fees. All of those costs, if they're reduced, will benefit the entire residential class. But it will be up to the utilities to bring forth a proposal before the KCC in a rate proceeding, and that would follow the traditional process with other interveners and copious amounts of information being shared to justify the rationale behind the rate. So with that, Kansas Gas Service is supportive of this legislation. I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Darren Ives with Evergy. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Delperdang and members of the committee. My name is Darren Ives, and I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Evergy. Evergy does support House Bill 2156 in its current form because we view this as enabling legislation that will give the KCC the authority to consider additional tools proposed by the utility to help customers at certain income levels who at times may struggle to pay their bills. We do appreciate CURB's collaborative approach in advancing this bill. As you've heard, this is placed on the utility to identify and bring forward a proposal that will work best for the total set of our customers, and importantly, it will run through the full KCC process in a rate proceeding. So all stakeholders will be at the table. We'll all work to make sure that it's something we can put in place and feel good about when it comes out of the KCC approval process. If HB 2156 should become law, Evergy will continue its robust efforts already in place to assist income qualified customers in Kansas, which I've outlined a number of those in my written testimony. A couple I would highlight, we held outreach efforts last year. We conducted about 250 outreach efforts serving more than 20,000 low-income customers. We provided education and continue to provide education about the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, which provides a one-time per year payment to help with energy costs. Applications this year are open until March 31st, and we would encourage you to promote this in your constituent communications. It's an important tool for customers in your constituencies. To conclude, Evergy believes this legislation provides another tool in the toolbox to consider as it evaluates options and resources to help serve customers who need assistance. Thank you for your time, and happy to stand for questions.
Thank you for being here. Do we have Maxine Goucher from AARP online? Maxine? Okay. We will skip over here. With that, the rest I'm showing are written only, so they should be in your packet. And committee, any questions for those who have spoken already? And okay, first off, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Nichols, if I could ask you a question. I'm impressed with your career choice. Thank you. Everybody should have that attitude. I lived a life of robbing Peter to pay Paul, so I understand that a little bit. I just feel like, say we cut the rates in half. I think it'd be a great deal. I love what we're doing here, but I still think people are going to say, hey, I don't have the money to pay it this month. So what do you think of that?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I don't know that this bill is going to eliminate energy burden. I think to assert so would really be a false promise. But what we can do, and the reason that we put this in the utilities' hands, is because we think that they know their customer base better than anybody else does. And I'm impressed with our utilities, and particularly through the collaborative process, how much they understand the problems that energy burden customers have and how that equates to the residential class in general. We do believe that eventually what may need to be done is to look at, maybe in the rate case that a utility files, maybe in a generic investigation to the KCC, to try to determine what are the causes of energy burden. What do we need to address to make those problems, alleviate some of those problems. Some of those may be utility based, some of them may be community based, some of those may be state based. housing stock is a broad issue, as a lot of people that are energy burdened live in poor housing stock. So weatherization programs that could be run through this without having to go through Kia may be beneficial, even though that cost is going to be borne by broader than just the low income customers. That would not work clearly. So to try to answer your question directly, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to resolve the problems of people that just simply don't have money for housing, for food, for medicine, for energy. But at least this is a start, as our conferees behind me said. At least gives a tool to the toolbox to address the question, which we don't have now.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. We've got a few others with questions, but I'm going to stop just a second. I understand that Maxine Goucher with AARP is online. Maxine, can you hear us? Hello, Maxine.
Hello.
Hey, we can hear you now.
Okay.
So you have the floor. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee persons. We appreciate the opportunity to stand and say that we do support Bill 2196. As you know, we represent about 278,000 Kansans 50 years and older. And the majority of us are on Social Security fixed incomes, which I know you hear this all the time, but it's a truth we all face sometime in our life. And utilities, as well as healthcare, medications, these are all big ticket items. And any help that you could give us to help our senior citizens, your mother, your father, aunts, uncles, and constituents would be appreciated. Like I said, we do support this bill and hope that this will be a big plus for them and something that you can reach out and say, we've helped you, we are concerned about you, and it will be a way of helping ease some of the burden with the utility cost that it is. And we say utility, people look at electricity, but it's gas, water, whatever it makes to function your household. But we do, like I said, we do stand in support of this bill. And I appreciate the guidelines that you sent us on testifying in your committee. It very much appreciated. I'll stand for any questions that you have for me, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate you being here too. We do have questions, maybe not with you or for you, but if you would mind hanging on, there may be some directed. We had one person already ask a question, Representative Smith. Would you have any for her specifically? Okay. Then with that, I'll move on to Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, can I ask you a quick question? Thank you for collaborating on this with all the utilities and CURB. I think it's an important move. My question was, in the bill, we've talked a lot about rates as the subject of this, but it also includes terms and charges. Are there any ideas there or are you mainly looking at rate changes?
No, thank you for the question, Representative Schreiber. That's again a really great question. So we're kind of open to whatever the utilities would come up with. So, but there could be changes with regard to terms. For example, let's assume that there's a disconnect charge that occurs in a reconnect charge if you miss your bill. So the low income residential customer who loses electricity because can't pay it, or gas because they can't pay their bill, then they go to get connected. Not only do they have their bill to pay, which is going to be problematic, but they also have problems with regard to the reconnect fee, the disconnection fee, and it makes it even so much harder to go ahead and get reconnected. So those types of things, those changes in terms may very well be helpful. There are all different sorts of programs that are run throughout the United States, and not all of them are low income rates. And so we just anticipate it's up to the creativity of our utilities to come up with an answer. If I could, Chair, I'd like to anecdotally talk a little bit. When I first started my work at Depew Gillen, Spencer Depew was my senior partner, and one day he said to me, "I've got a problem. Would you find a solution?" So I took the problem and I came back with a solution. About a half hour later, I was pretty proud of myself. He's kind of puffed my chest out. Thought, boy, he's going to be proud of me and just promote me to partner right away. He didn't. He said, that's a solution. It's not the solution. It's not the solution I was looking for. Okay. So I went back, I worked a little harder, and I came back with a different solution. He looked at me and says, well, you come up with two solutions. It's still not the right one. So I went back a third time. I came back and I said, okay, here's the solution. He said, great. It's not the right one yet. And that's when I lost it. Probably should have been fired at that point, but I said, hey, look, if you've got the answer, why don't you just tell me what the answer is versus sending me back and forth from my office? And he said, well, the solution is this. There's not one solution to a problem. There are several. And until you start to be creative and start to think about all those different things, you're not really doing service for your clients. And I walked back with my tail between my legs, and he was absolutely right. Let's leave this to utilities to come up with solutions and terms and charges and fees, whatever they can come up with, subject again to approval by the Kansas Corporation Commission under customary standards that we've always lived with and will live with regard to that. So I hope that anecdote wasn't too much, and I hope it answered your question.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Representative Schlangen-Sieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this question is for both Patrick Vogelsberg and also Darren Ives. And the question is, in your relative service areas, how many involuntary disconnects do you have each year? And how many of those are annual or annually? And how many of those are annual repeat disconnects?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I would need to get that information and bring it back to the committee. It may be information that the Kansas Corporation Commission has and can share directly, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Unfortunately, I'm probably in the same position. I can say we certainly do have a fair amount of repeat disconnects, and we have a number of disconnects. And it's been a weird environment over the last 2 years with going through COVID and some of the protections we put in place to not disconnect when we had that going on. But it's a problem that we continue to need to use tools like this to find solutions for. No doubt about that.
Could we just to follow up? If that's all right. Could we get that information?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the example that Mr. Nickel gave of there are several different answers. I also appreciate this first attempt at lowering rates for customers. But my questions are you going to get together, and I'll give this to Vogelsberg and Ives. Are you going to get together and set a definition of what low income is? Set the high level, can always be lower, so that there is a standard across all of the entities?
Thank you for the question. I would say, how this would be handled in a variety of different ways, but I would anticipate that a docket would be opened and all interveners could come together and have a discussion within that and whether or not there's some sort of precedential value to having a standard low income definition. There's probably some value to that, but the legislation itself obviously has left that open and left that flexible, and that's a matter for the KCC to take up and take into consideration.
Thanks for the question. I think that's absolutely the right approach to work through. I mean, we'll get all the stakeholders together and attempt to come up with something that's known and repeatable. Measurement is going to be something we're going to have to work through. We're not necessarily equipped to consistently measure and evaluate the income levels of our customers when they sign up, right? We work with a lot of third-party agencies when we get into distribution of light funds and things like that. So that will all be part of the process. And if it's standardized and handled consistently, it'll be a lot easier for sure.
Thank you. And one follow-up real quickly. You talked about, and it's not in the bill, the ability to do it. I mean, it's open, but that rate then, that would fall upon the next level ratepayers. By doing that and raising their rates to compensate, are you then opening the door to have the same problem on the lower end of that next income group? And I think when we look at this, we have to be conscious of what the long-term outcome is and not just the short-time answer to the problem. And I think this is a very generic bill that needs some work on setting parameters and limits so that those in each class understand the opportunities they have or what they're going to be facing. In today's world, everybody wants to know what's the cost and where do I stand, and if we can't give them some guidelines, then are we doing the best we can to set standards or laws and things without considering the people? And I'd like for both of you to, if you could answer that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, I'll step in first. I think it's a great comment. That there's probably no discrete answer, right? No specific threshold where we know how much is going to be too much of a shift to the next set of customers. And I think that's why it's important that we work through the full process with the KCC. I think we have all the stakeholders at the table. We use the expertise of the staff and the commission to help make sure that when we put this out, we have strong support for it. It's a rational approach, and we can explain it well to customers coming out of a proceeding where it gets set.
All right. I would agree with Darren Ives, what Mr. Ives just said. In addition to that, I would imagine that the KCC is also going to be weighing not only the cost and how those are going to be spread across the residential class, but then also the benefits, the cost reductions that offering a low income rate will offer those other customers. So I think both the cost and the benefits of this will be fully explored. And I would imagine as soon as a docket's opened up, we'll all be intervening in each other's case like we typically do. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your answers.
Representative Camp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an open question. Other states that have similar situations that you're after, what's the normal percentage decrease in utility bill or utility service? So for the low income customers, what if this passed and you could do what you wanted? What percentage decrease in their bill would you anticipate?
I'm not very familiar with a lot of other states. I know in Oklahoma, where one gas operates, there is a low income rate, and how that's structured is if you look at the kind of the three main parts of a utility bill: your service charge, your delivery charge, and cost of gas. The discount is on the service charge and the delivery charge for low income folks, but the cost of gas is set aside. That would be paid in its full. As far as how that what that looks like on an individual's bill, I'd need to ask internally what that looks like, because it's going to be very dependent on that particular customer's consumption. So anyways, but I'd have to get that information for you.
Representative Roth.
Just a question. I see in the news, KCC will ask for rate increase to increase rates to customers. Would this bill in its current form make it possible for an increase to residential customers without the KCC going and asking for a rate increase. This would, the short answer is no. It would require that the utility as part of a general rate proceeding to apply to the KCC, and KCC would go through a full regulatory process that they traditionally do when they're determining rates. And who does the KCC, when they do request a rate increase, who do they make that request to? Well, it would be on the utility that would bring forth a rate case and go through that regulatory process, and ultimately it'd be the commission that would determine whether or not to approve those rates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. Vice Chairman Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this question's for Mr. Nickel first. I noticed in your testimony, you say that CURB learned that a number of Kansas utilities have utility systems in other states that do this. So I guess the thing that's missing in all the testimony are those success stories of other states and their experience. The earlier question about how much the average reduction of bill, how much it reduced turnoffs, how much any of this stuff. I don't see anything quantified here. It seems kind of aspirational. Thanks.
Thank you. Good question. And I really don't know that I'm in a position to be able to answer that. I do know that, for example, I think Westar has a program various programs of terms and conditions that they implement in the state of Missouri. And I think and KGS has different programs that they have and there are other states of Oklahoma and Texas. Obviously, they must be somewhat successful because they're still on the books, but I think the success stories really pretty much belong to them.
Well, I would say things that go on the books rarely come off the books. But second, my next question, I guess, if I can have one, would be to Mr. Ives. So, does your company have a program like this in another state that would have quantifiable information to provide?
Yes, that's a great question. We operate, as the committee might know, in Kansas and Missouri. We do not have specific low-income rates developed in Missouri either. We do have some different terms and conditions, some different levels of disconnect and reconnect fees, which is not atypical. You have different outcomes in different jurisdictions, but nothing specifically designed for low income. So part of what we would be doing is, going out and doing some benchmarking, looking across our peers and identifying what's working for them and trying to put that into a proposal that we'd advance to stakeholders.
All right, thank you. This will be the last question, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to measure my words carefully. First, is there anyone here who can explain to us the low-income energy assistance project? Who pays for it? What benefits it provides, and what is different about that project as compared with what is contained in this bill? Thank you, Patrick. Mr. Vogelsberg, I appreciate you stepping up for that one.
Just so that we're clear, I think your question pertains to low-income energy assistance program that's federally funded. It's in short, it's referred to as either LIHEAP or LIHEAP. That is a program that's federally funded. Congress allocates those dollars every year. It's a block grant that comes down to the states and various allocations. In Kansas, it is administered by the Department of Children and Families. There are income requirements to that. People apply to that program. As it was previously mentioned, the window for application is from January to March. And in addition to low income requirements and demonstrating the financial need, I believe there's also questions regards to household size, the number of people living in that house, and then the ultimate benefit is determined along those lines.
So we already have a program that is funded by the federal government designed to deal with the same circumstance that this legislation addresses at the expense of ratepayers?
You are correct that there is also these resources that are available today and will continue to be available.
Second real quick question, I hope, not for you, Mr. Vogelsberg. Mr. Nickel was far too modest because he, in fact, was one of the absolute leading partners in that DePuy and Gillen firm, which is still in business, one of the leading practitioners in the state. And Dave, I'll tell you, Jim Sargent taught me the same lesson, the same way. It's a valuable lesson. My question, though, and to wrap this up, is I think, as all of us know, Karl Marx said in the 1870s, from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, or words to that effect. It sounds to me like what we're doing is we're using ratepayers, even at the margin of poverty and above, to pay for services for those who are below whatever the utility, with the consent of the KCC, describes as the limit, income limit for the program. Would anyone care to explain to me why this isn't an example of just outright socialism?
Thank you, Representative Carmichael. Thank you for the compliment with regard to my practice. I don't believe that this is a socialistic bill. This is something that allows utilities to try to be creative, to find avenues to help their low-income consumers. It cannot be discriminatory, unduly discriminatory, or unduly preferential. The KCC will certainly weigh in on that with every other stakeholder in a rate proceeding. It's an envelope by which we address those various concerns, but it still has to meet the strictures of Kansas standard of review as we have under Kansas statutes. None of those are changed. This doesn't change those aspects of it. This is not a pay according to whatever your ability to pay would be, although there are states that do have percentage of income payment programs. Kansas does not have one, and we're not advocating for one. We're just looking for a way to give our utilities broad discretion to try to figure out how to help their low-income customers. And we're comforted by the fact that in our collaborative process, we had so many utilities come in and say, this is a good deal. This is a good envelope. This is not prescriptive, but it allows us, as our conferee said, another tool in the toolbox. But we do not intend this to be socialized energy assistance in any manner whatsoever. I do want to address a question with regard to LIHEAP. LIHEAP is subject to huge swings, and anybody that studied LIHEAP knows that. The funding goes from real high to real low in a matter of years. It currently reaches approximately 15% of those are on energy have high energy burdens. That means 85% of the people are left. We want to leave them. Do we want to leave them, or do we want to find creative ways to help those 85% of low-income people out in manners that still meet the strictures of the KCC regulations and the statutes of the state of Kansas? So, great question, Representative. I really appreciate it.
With that, we need to get moving on. I'm watching the clock here. We've got neutral from the Kansas Corporation Commission. Jeff, welcome to the committee. And if you have any answers to the questions that were posed out there, I'm sure you feel free to make a few stabs.
Okay,
thank you.
I'll do my best. I think rather than my prepared remarks were just sort of a summation of my testimony, so I'll just jump into trying to answer questions. So I think one question was sort of how we would define low income, and I agree with what Mr. Ives and Mr. Vogelsberg said. Most logical probably way to go about doing that would be a general investigation where all of the utilities that would be implicated or involved would come in, and we'd list out all the issues that we need to determine, including that definition, and then provide some overall guidelines to all of the utilities to follow when they do make their applications. The bill does obviously provide leeway in terms of where do you hit unduly discriminatory in terms of however much discount you're going to provide to low income customers. And we do have expertise in rates and dealing with those types of issues all the time. I think we can arrive at a reasonable conclusion, but I understand the reservations on that as well. So there'd be a number of issues that we would need to resolve to move forward with it, but I think it's doable. But ultimately, clearly, it's a matter of policy for the legislature to determine this. It's a big step forward from where we are today. We also have one thing I was going to mention is, I provided a little bit of background on previous cases that we've completed studying low income rates and trying to determine whether they were legal and ultimately determining they were not under Kansas case law and Kansas statutes. So if the committee would like, there is a document out there attached to one of the dockets that sort of provides a summary of legal staff's analysis of why it's illegal. So if that's helpful at all, we can certainly provide that to you. So I tried to catch some of the questions. I don't know if there's any more or not. So.
Well, we've got one here he's been waiting patiently. So,
okay.
Representative Bergquist.
Yes. Is it not true that the utilities, both gas and electric, already practice a leniency without discrimination on cold weather events to rich and poor alike if there's an extraordinary bill, or just during the winter season when there's not a good opportune time to turn off the power?
Right. We have a cold weather rule as part of the building standards, and based on a certain temperature, I think it's 30, 34, 32, somewhere around in there. If there's a period of time where the temperatures are in that range, they cannot shut off service for any reason. During the summer, during the heat of the summer, there is no summer rule equivalent to the cold weather rule, but by and large, I know Evergy does this. If temperatures are getting really hot, like 98 to 100 for a few days, they will most likely hold off on disconnects during that time period as well. So there's some voluntary pieces of that. Having said that, that's only temporary, right? They don't pay their bills during that period, and then they have to sign up for a payment plan to pay off those past due balances as they move forward.
Sure, not a forgiveness plan, but certainly not discriminating between people. And that's one of the things we're talking about is that discrimination factor. And I know that even if it's statutory, it's something that is equally shared.
Right. Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Representative Roth.
This is just a comment, and I think some of the terminology is subjective and just, and let's see here where it says must be collected from the residential customer class on your testimony, but strikes a balance but limits the amount of unjust or unreasonably discriminatory. And so what's unjust to you may not be unjust to me. What's non-discriminatory to you may be discriminatory to me. So it's just a comment. I think there's something that's not really clear and just sets up for anything could happen.
Yeah, I can say from that perspective, right? Courts have tried to determine what's just and reasonable in the past, and they can't get there. It is a very difficult question, to your point, that it's different in the eyes of each beholder. And so, that information from each of the parties involved comes in of whether or not a rate or an issue is just and reasonable. And then commissioners have to decide that. So it's just kind of a standard problem within determining rates overall.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. With that, thank you, Jeff, for being here. I do appreciate it. I don't see any opponents on the list. Is there anybody out there wishing to speak? Do not see that. With that said, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2156. Need to move on to House Bill 2226. And could I get Jesse to explain it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm Jesse. I'm down in the basement helping Nick with a lot of the things you see up here, but I'm double booked at this time. But I'm happy to be here to brief the committee on House Bill 2226. So House Bill 2226 amends several statutes that are in the Kansas Underground Utility Damage Prevention Act. What the bill does, it amends the definition of white lining as to add that you could identify such route or boundary by other technology developed for such purpose. It also amends the definition of a permitted project to include a condition to be considered a permitted project, to include that a notice of intent of excavation shall be served on all operators in order to get that permit. The bill also amends all references of notice of intent to excavate. So currently, most notices shall be given under the statute between 2 days before and 15 days before. So the bill amends the amount of days not to exceed 20. So they were limited to the 15 days before. The bill amends it to 20 days before. The bill also includes a provision that allows the KCC to adjust the extent of that time. So they could, through the rules and regulations process, extend that past that 20 days. The bill would also require that the notification center for all underground facilities give a prompt report of any damage or contact with an underground facility to the operator of that facility. The bill would also allow the maximum number of days allowed for an operator providing the location of a tolerance zone, which is going to be kind of that zone around the facility. And that's defined in the statute, may be adjusted by the State Corporation Commission. And that relates to that notification of the tolerance zone. When there is contact or damage to an underground facility, the excavator shall also immediately notify the operator of the facility and the notification center. So both of those entities are getting notifications when there is contact or damage. And then right now, there's a current statute allows for economic damages in any civil court when there's a failure of an operator to inform the excavator within 2 days of the tolerance zone of the underground facility. The bill amends that and allows for damages if an operator fails to inform the excavator at all before the start date.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. Committee, is there any questions for the reviser? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you said, the language changes it from 15 to 20, but then that new provision below that talks about that they can change that at any time. So 20 is just the current placeholder, but it's really an open issue, isn't it? Thank you.
Yes, and that would be up to the KCC's discretion.
All right. Any other questions? With that, thank you, Jesse. First up on the proponents is Leo Hanos with Kansas Corporation Commission. Welcome to the committee.
There is that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Leo Hanos. I'm the chief engineer for the KCC. And what this bill, we support, obviously 2226. What the bill is trying to do is to update provisions of the statute that have been around since 1993, when the ticket volume or the amount of excavation work in Kansas was much lower. And we're trying to get this updated to get more efficiency in the locating process, at the same time to make the rules more flexible and to not sacrifice safety in getting that done. The three major changes that are in here. One is for the idea about white lining. If I could describe that to you, what happens there if an excavator calls in that he's going to replace a water line, mark the entire yard of a house, for example, the utility can request him to actually show the path that he's going to do the digging, so they don't have to mark every facility in the yard, just that path. And this would allow the excavator to actually do that on a map. Now the technology is there. They can do it with GIS type technology, show the utility exactly where he's going to dig and allow them to give more specific, detailed, and perhaps shorter locates for that particular one. So that's a change we're making just because technology is there. The second one that I want to address is the one about the ticket life. That's the length of life that a ticket can be in existence. The ticket life dates back to 1993. At that time, we put in a 15-day ticket life because the concern is that marks would get wiped out. There would be nothing there for the excavator to see, so he had to refresh that ticket every 15 days. That problem, as the rate of excavation increases in the state, now we're up to 658,000, I think, in 2022 locate requests. Each locate request requires 5 utilities to take an action. So now there's 3.6 million actions that utilities have to do across the state. And because of that, you get into a logistics problem with trying to meet that demand before the ticket life runs out. We'll get calls a lot from excavators that are saying, I called for tickets, no one got there on time because they just were overwhelmed. Now it's 10 days into their ticket before I got my locates. I've only got 5 days left. I'm going to call in 2 days early so I have locates to go past the 15 days. So they call in on day 12 or 13, and it just sort of grows on itself. 30% of the locate requests are updates in Kansas. That's the target we're trying to address by increasing the ticket life. So for that amount, I think in 2022, there's 187,789 locates that were updates. And for that amount, you have another 5 utilities. So that's almost 2 million tickets that were located twice at the same location. Now, things happen. There's rain, work gets behind, marks get wiped out. All those require updates. But we're trying to see if we can address just a little bit of this by extending that ticket life. When we started this process, we were talking to the various stakeholders, and some of them are here in the room today, that asked, I suggested let's go to 30 days. Let's see if we can bring down this amount of updates. The gas utilities are still concerned that that's going to be too far. They're afraid marks will get wiped out, and they think it could be a safety hazard. So for that reason, we've extended to 20 days, give it another 5 days, see if we can move the needle a little bit. At the same time, we're asking for the authority to address this in rules and regs. One thing about the statute, in my opinion, it reads like a regulation. There's very specific details of what has to be done. And because of that, it ties us really tightly to making a change. We have to come back before you guys to get a change made. So we're asking for, in 2 places, the rules and regs process to be allowed to address this through the typical due process we would use for that purpose. We have rule and reg authority in the law, but these specific things are addressed, very detailed, and we're trying to make sure we have some ability there. Another provision we made was trying to address the other end of the ticket life, right? So you call in for a ticket, you have to wait 2 days to get your locate. Well, in my example, if you called a plumber and said, I need to have you work here, and I want you to be here in 2 days, he's going to tell you, like, I'm busy, I'm going to be a week out. Utilities don't get to do that. They have to be there on the second day, or they're in violation of the law. So we would have the ability under rules and regs to possibly adjust that based on ticket volume. We're not sure if we're going to do that, but we want that flexibility if we need to get there as work increases. What we are seeing in Kansas with all the infrastructure projects going on, you had bills, I think, when I was here last week talking about the telecom work that's coming up. There's going to be a lot of excavation work going on. So you have basically almost an infinite number of excavators because they come from all over the country to do this work, but you have a finite number of homegrown utilities that have to provide these locates. And we're trying to get that more efficiently. The last point I'd make that we're trying to address, that's kind of a major point. There is some cleanup all through here, by the way. But the last major point really deals with reporting damages to the call center. We're asking to require the excavator to make another call to the call center if you hit something to report that damage. That gives the call center an ability to notify the utility and to notify us, basically because we see their data set of when that damage occurs. That will help us track damages and maybe investigate them at a little more frequency. Right now, we're complaint driven. We see several hundred a year, but I know there's a lot more out there that we could be weighing in on. I think that pretty much addresses the big points. There are some little things in here that are my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions you would have.
Thank you, Leo. We're going to hear from a couple others, and we'll open it up there. Patrick Vogelsberg, Kansas Gas. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patrick Vogelsberg, Kansas Gas Service. I omitted this from my previous intro, but we are the state's largest natural gas public utility. We have 647,000 customers in the state across 360 communities. And we have over 13,000 miles of pipeline in this state. We view the Underground Utility Damage Prevention Act under two hats. Obviously, we're an operator of a Tier 1 facility, and we have the requirements upon us to go out and locate those upon request. Kansas Gas Service typically does more than 350,000 locates per year. We also view this under the hat of being an excavator. On a daily basis, we go out and send one of the largest excavation crews out across the state as we do work on our pipelines, either repair or maintenance and responding to emergencies. And so with that, we try to balance this between the operator and the excavator. And we've worked with the KCC and Mr. Hanos. He provided a good overview of the specific points. I won't go into that due to time. But we are favorable of this bill and ask the committee to act favorably on it when you work it. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Next up would be Rex Schick with K&W Underground. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, committee. Thanks for the opportunity to stand before you and discuss this very important topic. I'm in support of House Bill 2226. I've been an excavator in Kansas for over 45 years. I've seen multiple revisions to the Underground Damage Prevention Act and the effects of it on damage prevention. I think currently it's time to revise those rules again, as Leo said, taking into account the new technology that we have available. So currently it's common for an excavator to not receive on-time and accurate locates. And as a result, that slows the process down, major delays, and it also puts the workers and the general public at risk. There's been 2 specific studies done related to this underground damage prevention. The Common Ground Alliance, which is a national stakeholder group specifically dedicated to underground damage prevention. Their latest study shows that there's $30 billion in 2019, $30 billion related to underground damage to the infrastructure. That is a tremendous societal impact alone, plus the negative impact on public safety. The Infrastructure Protection Coalition, a group of concerned stakeholders, conducted a nationwide, state-by-state review of the damage prevention rules and regulations and its effectiveness. This study is the most extensive review ever conducted of damage prevention. In Kansas, the report indicates in 2019 that there was $330 million worth of direct out-of-pocket expenses related to utility damages and an additional $70 million in waste and inefficiencies in the system. The cost of these inefficiencies are paid by customers and ratepayers of the state of Kansas. It's also a clear indication of the volume of underground utility damages, and each damage puts the citizens of Kansas at risk. The IPC report lists Recommendations to improve the weaknesses or gaps in the current damage prevention law. They are mandatory damage reporting, balanced enforcement, third-party enforcement board, standard minimized notification time, effective penalty structure, annual reporting to the CGA and DIRT report, excavation site descriptions via white lining, and GIS system adoption by asset owners, and a standard ticket size, length, duration, and life. While House Bill 2226 does not address all these recommendations, the bill takes the right step to revise the statute to improve the rules, regulations, processes, and practices of underground damage prevention in Kansas. I would ask that you, as a committee member, support House Bill 2226 and the changes to help improve underground damage preventions for the betterment of the Kansas citizens. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Committee, we've also got written only from Michael Ruffin with AT&T. And with that, do you have any questions for the proponents on this bill? Okay. Representative Carmichael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, I think, is best answered perhaps by Mr. Hoynes, if he could help me out. As you're approaching, as you know, I still have concerns about what happened in my district.
Yes, sir.
White line, excavators, backhoe, line, gas line right underneath the white line, backhoe through the side of the pipe. My constituents evacuated in the dark of night, so I'm concerned about these things. But I think this legislation may actually be a good step. I'm in agreement with you. Maybe this might be better handled by rules and regulations than statutory requirements, so that we can be somewhat nimble to deal with changes in technology and practices. So I'm with you on, I think, almost all of this. But I would like for you, if you would, to explain to us virtual white lining. I think I know what it is, and my friends at Black Hills have tried to educate me a little bit. But could you explain it to us and how this works?
If I could I defer to the call center who's represented here? They could tell you exactly what it would be. Tom Shimon's here with the
I'd be
executive director of
happy
the call center.
I'd be, with the chair's permission, I'd be happy to hear from the right person.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Tom Shimon. I'm Executive Director of Kansas 811, Kansas One Call System, or DigSafe. We have many names, but to address your particular question, white lining is a process that we use right now. It's at the request of the underground facility owner, but it's best used to identify the excavation area physically on the ground versus trying to explain the excavation area to one of our call center representatives who has to try and interpret that and put that on the locate request. So the excavator would go out there and white line the proposed excavation area so that when the locator goes out there, he knows exactly where he needs to locate those facilities. And anything outside that area, he doesn't have to worry about. We have, with our new system, the ability to electronically do that at the call center, where you can, with your computer, basically draw the excavation box in a white line, and then that can be transmitted to the underground facility owners, and they can use that as additional reference to do their underground markings.
Okay, I'm not quite following. I understand the concept that we do a pre-mark. The excavator contacts the center and under existing practice, they can, in some circumstances, go out in advance of the locating service and paint on the ground an area where they're intending to dig. That way, the locating service can locate where the excavation is intended rather than somewhere where it's not. Am I on track so far?
Yes, you are.
Okay. And electronic white line pre-mark, I assume, is rather than physically sending somebody out with white paint to paint a box or a rectangle, we do it electronically. We send it to you, and then when the locator goes out, they know where the intended excavation is, even though it's not painted on the ground.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's the idea behind it.
But
I must also say that not all utilities would be would have the ability to receive that that white lining drawing because they receive either by fax. Some fax machines we cannot send those drawings to them. We also have a few members that we actually telephone them all the information that's on the locate request.
But my question is, would virtual white lining do away, though, with the eventual physical mark on the ground that shows where the underground utility is? Or will there still be always somebody who's going out there to the site with the can of paint and or the flags and marking where the utility lines are within the box designated by the excavator?
Yeah, at this time, with current technology, you would still have to go out and put physical markings on the ground to identify that underground utility. There may become a day when the GIS systems get so technical that no longer physical markings on the ground may no longer be needed, but that's going to be at least 10, 20 years out.
Okay, and so, Mr. Chairman, my question, I know we're running out of time. My question to the revisor is, will this legislation permit what he's just described? No physical visit, no physical mark on the ground, because that would cause me dismay. Go ahead, Nick.
So the Representative Carmichael, the definition for white lining, the update to that definition in there does use the term or. So it's using that white paint, white stakes, or identifying such route or boundary by other technology. So it would be an either or situation, probably generally subject to some KCC rules and regulations on that topic as well.
Draw me an amendment. We'll talk about it.
All right, thank you. Moving right along here. Looks like we've got a couple neutral testimonies, one from Black Hill Energy and City of Overland Park. They are both written. And we have one in person from Christopher Cross, USIC Central Plains Region. Chris, you have the floor.
Yes, sir, Chairman. Thank you for your time. Christopher Cross, State Director for Kansas for USIC. I have a little bit written here. First time I've done this, but our position on this is absolutely against these measures. Not all the measures, but definitely the 15 to 20 day measures. I believe there are many points that need to be presented. The main areas include what confines the fluid process of the dig laws, the true costs to the customers and the excavators, and the increased risk to the public. We've heard just a minute ago how this is going to help damages. It's all under the pretense that this is the Kansas Damage Prevention Act, and that's what we're using to change it from 15 to 20 and most likely 30 days. The data shows that that's pretty much the exact opposite of what's going to happen. As the vice chairman says, what goes on the books doesn't come off the books. So we know it will never go back. So if it goes to 20, we know it's never going back to 15 or 14 in 1993 when it started. So when it gets to 30, it's either going to go further, but we know it's not coming backwards. Now, USIC, which is the largest locating company in Kansas, our concerns with the proposal to increase the life of the ticket from 15 to 20 days. We are also very concerned with the proposal to make it a KCC decision through committee to increase these days without elected legislative committee oversight. To my knowledge, there has been no data given to the committee that will support the changes from 15 to 20 days. The effect of these changes will have on public safety and the outcome of such changes which we are also concerned with turning over the public safety to the KCC without legislative oversight. And that's under KSA 66-1815. The public safety portion of it, we heard that a commission was put together by an outside company that said all these costs and safety wise. The recommendations that were read off by that individual does not pertain to what we're talking about today in the most part. It did say standardized days. We have standardized days. We have standardized start days. He also mentioned white lining, which is going to be important here in a minute. We do have the option to request white lining. The process for that is for us to request a white line from the excavator contractor. And they have to do it within 48 hours. If they do not do that and follow our request, then we present that to the KCC. This is a multi-month process to maybe get a fine on that individual. Those excavators are gone. The excavators have changed titles, names, and it never, ever gets done. So there is a solution to that. I'll talk about that in the solution part. On the public safety, prior to the proposal being sent to the committee, the main reason for these requested changes were to improve and prevent damages. Once the data shows that that doesn't happen, it was then shifted to monetary. And I believe the KCC was quoting like $17 million in extra charges to the utilities because of what we call updates. There is a charge for that, absolutely. But you have to understand what the definition of an update is and examples of updates. So an update is an excavator calling in literally 27 miles on a ticket, 27 miles. Nobody can do that in 2 days. No company in the country can do that in 2 days. In 2 days, that excavator knows they can't do it either, right? They just can't do it, but they absolutely put it in that way. They can start at after 2 days, they can start digging anywhere within that 27 miles legally, causing damages. Even if they don't see paint on the ground or flags on the ground, they can dig legally by our statutes. The KCC committee members have used the example of other states. I believe in data. Everything is data driven, mostly. Benchmarking. There is no data on any of this reducing damages. There is no data on benchmarking any other states. But what's always mentioned is Missouri, because Missouri has a 0. There is no lifespan to their tickets over there. None at all. Is that good? Can we benchmark against that? We're not asking for that. Right? The KCC is not asking for that. But I can show you all the data that says anybody above 15 days has more investigations, what I call investigations, damage investigations, using our company data for our investigations. Above 15 days. And everyone that's below 15 days has less. Now, of course, that changes with ticket count, because that's what we're talking about, total tickets. So just using the Missouri side, 22,500 investigations completed by USIC in 2022. 22,000 at an average cost of $2,500 a piece. Of course, there's only 2 people at fault. There's either the locating company and or the excavators. Our total at fault, and it's scrutinized by all the utilities, is roughly around 12% of that. All those other damages, $57 million in damages, just that we investigated, are all to the excavators. Now the question is, I didn't break down the data to what those causes were. But just to think about that, on the Kansas side, we had 4,000 and change on total investigations in 2022. So as you go up in days, it also increases the damages that everybody was just saying that they're concerned about. If you look at that, and I can show you many other states, but I was just using Missouri because the KCC in the meetings, we always use Missouri as examples and open up the floor to that. So when you talk about public safety, there's a perfect example because public safety is directly related to damages. We had to evacuate. You were talking about evacuating. I also run Nebraska. In Lincoln, due to a gas strike, our fault. But still, the importance is every damage could be that. We had to evacuate a nursing home and a daycare center. So you can see the ramifications as we increase our days. And their days in Nebraska are 17. The next point they were trying to, the KCC is trying to make, and others that have talked up here, is cost. When you talk about updates, and some data was thrown out just on the amount of updates, it's 29%. It's on the third page of the folder that I gave you. It's actually 28.9% for all of 2022. Updates can only be put in by excavators. That's it. Can't be put in by locators. So you have the updates. The other side of that is what's called non-responses. So the other individuals testified that it's due because they can't get their tickets done. Well, in reality, the non-responses of all those 600 and some thousand tickets is 2%. 2%. Those are directly related to locating issues, problems, whatever it may be at the time, and we fully accept that. But the difference between 2% and 28% is a very, very large gap. And to say maybe the non-responses are off 1% or 2%, I'm okay with that. But what is that gap? Why is that gap caused? Well, the cause is because we put in tickets that are too long. We can't manage the tickets. Not when I say we, excavators, contractors can't manage the tickets. And it goes on and on and on. And it's not, when you look at that 28%, there's nothing broken down to say how many of those are actually triple and quadruple. We've got sitting there this morning, I just called, we have tickets out there that have been updated 44 times since October. We have others that have been updated. The 44 was from March of last year. The 20 times is from October. Out of the 4,000 plus open tickets that we have at USIC for Kansas today, 1,442 of those tickets are updates. There is no labor issue with us. I actually cut off interviews in the state 4 weeks ago. Those updates are 100% the cause of not planning properly. It's because tickets are too big. The projects are too big. You also heard the testimony saying, well, part of that feedback on how to improve is the scope of the ticket, the size of the ticket. We really don't have a scope or size. We haven't implemented that. You would wonder why that isn't on the table. Because as you get smaller, it's much easier to manage the business on our side. It's much easier to manage the business on the excavator side. But everybody's adamant against it because it would cause more work, the back office work, to put more tickets in. It's much easier for somebody in the back office to put 27 miles in, right? I got 27 miles. I got statutes backing me up saying that USIC is at fault if I dig on that after 2 days.
Mr. Cross, I've got to cut you off just for time.
No problem. I will move on.
Committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Cross? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, I mean, I'm familiar with your trucks. I've seen them often in neighborhoods and things. As this bill was being put together, were you consulted with? I mean, you're saying in your testimony you're the biggest.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you had opportunity for input in the development of the bill?
No, I didn't have input on that. At the meetings, I'm not allowed to sit on the board, but I am on the advisory board. I mentioned this data to them. I mentioned the damages will be going up. The data shows the damages will be going up. The data shows why we have updates. And that hasn't been put into the bill. And all those other options that Rex brought up, that committee or council that was funded to show how we improve, if you replay that back, there's 5 or 6 that are not anything to do with this bill. Virtual white lining is not part of what he just said. Virtual white lining is great, but the white lining process, the easy way to fix this, there's multiple easy ways to fix the update problem that we haven't even tackled or heard about. So,
Committee, any other questions? I'm not seeing anything. At this point, I've got to close the hearing on House Bill 2226. So thank you everybody for showing up here. I was hoping to run 2225, but we are basically out of time, so we're going to have to reschedule that. I apologize for anybody that showed up just to testify to that one. Next Tuesday, February the 14th, we are actually going to be working 2156, and we're going to have a hearing on 2237 and 2154. With that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.